I would see Kansas City as a team being on the outside looking in.
That's spicy.
Gardner Minshew is the best backup in the NFL.
I love Gardner. Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes of Football with Legit Football. I am your host, Brian McFadden. We're back. We were off last Friday, just trying to take a few days here and there as we gear up for the actual NFL season. Extremely excited for my guest week, so we're going to get right to it. I've got my friend Ari Meirov of PFF, NFL Insider, joining 30 Minutes of Football. Ari, man, how's it going?
Brian, it's great to be on. I think this is my third time being on a show of yours, first time with a legit football element to it. So I'm really excited about this, and we're into August and there's NFL news going out like crazy. So a lot to talk about.
And we got football coming up. Like, people are actually playing. We got the Hall of Fame game coming up. You know more than anyone that there's so much during the offseason. We're just focused on news and extensions and trades. But then it's like, oh, wait a second. There's actual games. Like, we do this because of the game that's played. So I'm really excited. Ari, a quick refresher on the rules. So you and I have prepared questions that we're going to ask each other. We don't know the questions ahead of time. Are you ready to just jump in and get this party started?
Yeah, let's get rolling. I'm excited.
Great. So as is customary, you as the guest have by default won the coin toss. You get to choose to receive the first question or ask the first question before we get started. Which do you want to do?
I'm gonna receive it.
Awesome. So 30 minutes of football with Legit Football starts now. So I had prepared a number of questions ahead of time, and then some news broke this morning and automatically had to move that to the top of the list. So it's great that you wanted to receive the first one, and that obviously has to do with the Miami Dolphins. So you reported, along with a number of others, that they lost due to NFL found tampering. They lost a 2023 first-round pick. They lost 2024 third. Owner Stephen Ross is suspended until October. But my question is not necessarily about that. It's more about, how does this affect the Dolphins' plans in 2023? They had 2 first-round picks, specifically with regards to quarterback. It was kind of like a fallback, the way I saw it, where if with everything they've done for Tua this year, if he wasn't going to work out, they kind of had some ammunition to go after another quarterback. Now they don't have that. How does this ruling affect the Dolphins' quarterback plans in 2023?
Well, first of all, the NFL really came down hard on this whole thing. I mean, they talked to Tom Brady back in 2019 and 2020 before he became a free agent. That offseason, which was the COVID year, they talked to him again this offseason and during the season, along with Sean Payton, who they both share an agent. They wanted to bring both of them to Miami, trade for both of them, and basically create a super team there with the Dolphins, and it all failed, in part because of the Brian Flores lawsuit. But I think your point is definitely a good one because, as you mentioned, they did have 2 first-round picks going into next year, one from the 49ers in the big Trey Lance trade, and then one of their own. The league is taking away their own first-round pick. That means they're only left with the 49ers pick, which basically means whatever pick they have next year is going to be really on how Trey Lance plays in San Francisco and how they do in their first year there with that team. And, they've added so many great pieces around Tua Tagovailoa this offseason, but there's still that big question of, is he the guy? Like, you have a Tyreek Hill and a Jalen Waddle and, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Mike Gesicki, so many great pieces, a lot of speed pieces where he doesn't necessarily have to be that gunslinging quarterback. He could do so many little things that Mike McDaniel draws up and just get the ball into their playmakers' hands and make things happen. But what if he isn't the answer? What if he isn't, that quarterback that gets them to 9-10 wins and into the playoffs? Now you're without a first-round pick next year, or at least 2 first-round picks, and in a quarterback class that is considered super deep. At least now, we haven't played any college games, but at least a lot of people believe that will be a super deep quarterback class. This definitely affects them. So looking at the long term, you make a great point. Come 2023, if Tua isn't the guy, we're going to be looking back on August 2nd and how the league came down hard on them without now having a first-round pick next year.
Yeah, I really think it affects what they planned on. That whole contingency plan is kind of out the window. You still have a first round pick, but barring injury, a lot of people are viewing the Niners as a potential candidate for a Super Bowl run. I mean, they were one game away from it last year. So it is a very real possibility, assuming Lance plays decent, that Niners pick will be a very late first. So your whole idea of having ammunition to trade up is kind of out the window now. So I'm really curious to see what Tua does. Look, if Tua is the guy, as you said, he's got all these weapons now, it's a moot point. But what if he isn't? What if he is the guy that's kind of been like up and down and mediocre? The Dolphins don't have that plan to kind of go after a quarterback as aggressively as they could have with 2 first-round picks. So what is the ball is now back on your side of the field, or you may ask the first question from you.
All right, my question is the Lamar Jackson situation, and it's really obviously I think people know the situation by now. He's entering the 5th year of his contract. If he plays out this year, he's essentially going to be going into the franchise tag game next year. My question, and of course he's doing it without an agent, which I think is also noteworthy. My question is, if it doesn't get done in the coming weeks or days, will this become a major distraction in Baltimore?
Well, he came out recently saying that there is a bit of a deadline, but I couldn't interpret that, and I'm curious to get your take on this as well. Does that mean like he's done talking to them, or he doesn't want it as a distraction during the season? Based on what I've seen Lamar said, he seems a little bit more like, look, we're going to negotiate until here. If we get a deal done, great. If not, I'm here to play football. Lamar has a lot to prove. He knows he has a lot to prove. He has yet to really get over that hump. Yes, he won MVP in his second season, but he hasn't reached some of the heights of some of these other quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes comes to mind. So even Herbert and Burrow. So you kind of have a little bit more to prove as Lamar Jackson. There's questions about him as a passer. And is he always just kind of be that running quarterback without Greg Roman building an offense around him? So I'd like to think that Lamar knows this, and it's not necessarily to his benefit to make this contract dispute a big distraction. If they don't get a deal done in time for the season, I'd like to think he just wants to buckle down, prove himself, and then the negotiation becomes easier. At the end of the year, he can say, hey, I led you guys to the AFC Championship game. I was one of the top 3 or 4 vote getters for the MVP. I have shown you definitively that I'm worth this contract. Let's get a deal done. So if I'm Lamar, that's the angle I'm taking. Because he is his own agent, it's a little different, because you know this, Ari, that a lot of times agents put stuff out there on social media, or they'll put it out through insiders like, you and Rappaport and Schefter to kind of milk both sides of that negotiation. Lamar doesn't have that. So it's just Lamar's voice. So at what point does what he's saying just actually what he feels? Like, hey, we're going to cut it off here. If we get a deal done, great. If not, I'm going to do everything I can to prove myself. We'll restart negotiations at the end of the year. What's your take on Lamar?
Yeah, so I believe the cutoff date that he mentioned last week in his press conference is before week 1 of the season. And the Ravens are actually one of the teams in the league that are actually okay with negotiating in season. But since, as you said, Lamar is his own agent and he has a couple of advisors and his mother, it sounds like it's either now or never. We're not going to continue stretching this out. My thing is that, and I think we're starting to realize it, is that the longer this takes, and again, it's unprecedented for a quarterback who is really a star quarterback, former unanimous MVP, has been efficient as a runner and really also as a passer, to go into his 5th and final year of his contract without an extension. Like a lot of these star quarterbacks try to get it done after year 3. We just saw it with Kyler Murray, who some people don't even know if he is a star quarterback. For him to go into year 5 already without an extension is kind of crazy. And a lot of agents around the NFL would have never allowed him to step on the field come last year. So him going into this year without a contract is a big deal. My thing is, and we'll see now with all these networks, ESPN, NFL Network, and all of that, the longer it takes to get done, the more this becomes a conversation. And if you remember a couple of years ago with Dak Prescott, where he was franchise tagged twice, they couldn't get a deal done. If you remember how basically that was everyday TV coverage because they couldn't get a deal done, I have a feeling that if this one doesn't get done, it has the potential to become that because, again, it's a star quarterback without an extension entering the final year of his rookie contract. So that's what I'm really keeping an eye on over here.
Well, do we think that, how much of Dak's the coverage he got was maybe his agent floating it out to the different covers? So do you think that is the media itself will just take this on? Because if nobody's floating stuff out there, and maybe he's got advisors, Lamar's got advisors that are doing that kind of thing, but if nobody's planting different seeds to kind of keep the conversation going on the public forum, would we see the same thing, or we think the national NFL coverage media is gonna cover this regardless?
Yeah, in this scenario, like you're right, there are times where agents do put out stuff or even teams put out stuff. In this scenario, it's still a star quarterback who is one of those top quarterbacks in the NFL who is always being talked about and always being either scrutinized or talked about in a good way, whatever it is. And the fact that it feels like people would think, oh, the Ravens don't want to pay him, when in reality they do. It's just finding common ground. It
Right.
just becomes a big topic of discussion. And you can imagine how that ends up flowing into the locker room and it gets talked about throughout the building, which again is something you don't want, especially after a year which they just came off of with a bunch of injuries. You're looking to bounce back. The last thing you want is this being a topic of conversation throughout the season.
Right. So hopefully for the Ravens' sake, coming back after all those injuries they suffered last year, hopefully it's not a distraction. They can just get down to playing football. So my next question to you, Alvin Kamara, news recently came out that they pushed his hearing back 2 months. It looks like towards the end of September. As a reminder to anybody listening or watching, this was due to an assault he had in Las Vegas, I believe back in February. There's been talks out there of a possible suspension. I think Pro Football Talk put out that the Kamara camp is bracing for a 6-game suspension. But I'm going to ask you, what is your prediction? Well, especially in light of the Watson news, like what is your prediction of what the Kamara suspension, if any, will be once it comes down?
Yeah, so the Kamara situation would have to go through the same process as the Watson process, and that process hasn't even started yet, which is with a judge in the middle, and she would determine something, and Roger Goodell or the NFLPA would be allowed to appeal. Same thing as Watson. So, what I would say about this is I think people were jumping a little bit too far about this. I do think the Saints are expecting something, and their actions have kind of confirmed that by bringing in several running backs in for workouts over the last few weeks. But as you mentioned, his court date was pushed off, and I believe I have to double check this, but I don't think the NFL could or even would want to hand down a suspension until the court date and everything is resolved. So I think we should at least pump the brakes on it and wait a little bit more. I do think, as I said, the Saints are anticipating something, but I think when that report initially came out, the reaction that I got from most people is that it feels a bit early to know exactly what's going on. And Alvin Kamara actually responded to that report saying, you have no idea what you're talking about. So I think, yes, I think something eventually does happen and the Saints will eventually have to play without him for a number of games. How many games will it be? When will we find that out? I think we should wait a little bit more on that.
Yeah, our lead story in Legit Football was mentioning that exact thing, Ari, that the NFL tends to wait until the legal system has completely run its course before coming down with their own disciplinary action. So we actually mentioned it could be looking to 2023 before any of this actually from the NFL side comes down.
The longer that it keeps on getting pushed off, there's potential it could definitely get there. Now, I'm not saying it will, but as you said, I think the NFL wants the legal process to first play out. Then it goes to the jointly approved arbitrator, and he makes a ruling, whoever it is. And then from there, we'll know if there's an appeal going on and if, it eventually actually happens. Like, again, if let's just say we got to that point where the arbitrator puts a suspension, the NFLPA, let's say it's 6 games, the NFLPA would be allowed to appeal that. And it goes to Roger Goodell. Let's say Roger Goodell leaves it at 6 or moves it to 4. They're allowed to take it to district court, similar to the way it happened with Ezekiel Elliott. So there's an element of this where it's still a little bit early with everything. We're still waiting for a lot of chips to fall before it becomes official.
Great. So we have just over 3 minutes left until our halftime. Question is on you.
Yeah, my next one is Odell Beckham Jr., still a free agent. My question really becomes, here we are in training camp right now. The Rams have opened up camp. And we know that he wants to go back to the Rams. He's open to going to the Rams. He crashed Sean McVay's wedding. He loved it back there last year, won a Super Bowl, tore his ACL. My question becomes, if he doesn't sign back with the Rams come the end of training camp, come the start of the regular season, will he be okay with not being on a team as the season starts, let him continue to recover on his own, and let the season start and let the teams come to him? Similar to how it was a bit last year when he was traded from the Browns or he was released by the Browns, and he got to see which teams really want me, which teams really need me, and it came down to the Packers or Rams. I think in that scenario where he waits until week 4, 5, and 6 and sees, oh, the Packers need a receiver, Or the Saints could use a receiver and I could be back with my friend in Jarvis Landry. Or I've always wanted to play with Tom Brady, or I always wanted to be with Bill Belichick. One of those type of things. Let it come to him when the season starts instead of rushing back and joining the Rams on a deal that probably won't be heavy on money. Let the season start, see who needs me. Will he do that, or will he just sign back with the Rams in the coming days and weeks?
I'm starting to think he's going to do the approach that you suggested, because he kind of just did it, right? What did he do? He got to pick and choose his destination, and he won a Super Bowl ring. So that to me is the most recent. You talk about recency bias. He just went through that process. It went as well as he possibly could have hoped, short of the injury. He got a contract. He got that ring. Wouldn't he want to do that again? He's the reports I've seen, and Ari, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he might not be ready to see the field again until October or November, as he recovers from that ACL injury. So if he already knows he's not going to be coming back until what could be like the halfway point or close to the halfway point of the NFL season, why not sit and wait? And it could be the Rams. Maybe the Rams are, 6-2 at that point, and they're cruising to another victory. He already is familiar with the team. But it seems like, why hasn't he already re-signed a deal? Sean McVay I think he was on the air with an interview during camp saying, hey, OBJ, if you're listening to this, we want you back. So it seems to me that OBJ is playing the same game he played last year. Like, let's see who's off to it. Maybe the Packers are great, except that Rodgers, Lazard hasn't made the jump. Rodgers is looking for a new guy to go to. The Saints have been strong, but Chris Olave is still coming along. Michael Thomas is showing, wear and tear after his 2 years off, and kind of see like they need me. They're going to really utilize me, or they're a front runner. They're a contender. I want to ride that train and be the one that helps get over to the hump like I did for the Rams.
I think what you said is right. And as we reach with 10 seconds left, I think the Packers make a lot of sense for sure, because they were in on him last year. They wanted him last year. He chose the Rams. Adams is no longer there. Team of Aaron Rodgers, try to win a Super Bowl there. It makes a lot of sense if he waits.
Yep, completely agree. So we have hit halftime. If our producer wants to stop the timer. Awesome. So as a reminder, as always, guys, if you're not already subscribed, you want to get your morning briefing for free on everything that you need to know about the NFL 5 days a week. Just go to legitfootball.com, enter your email address. It will always be 100% free. We're gearing up for the season, but we've got lots of training camp nuggets now. 5 minutes or less, you'll get caught up. Legitfootball.com, hit join, enter your email. Could not be easier. Ari, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and hear about your stuff with PFF?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Add My Sports Update on Twitter. Check it out there. Get all your NFL news in one spot. The Ari Meirov NFL Show, wherever you listen to your podcast, also on YouTube. And of course, check out pff.com. A lot of great content going on there, not just by me, but by all my colleagues here as training camp ramps up, but the season's right around the corner.
Yeah, I have been a PFF Elite subscriber for probably the last 2 years. Even before Ari was an employee there. I mean, it's just, if you like analytics, if you like statistics, if you like to dig into a lot of the metrics that you don't get simply by watching the games, PFF is the way to go. It's fantasy season, guys. Go there, check it out, sign up for a subscription, arm yourselves with the best knowledge. Between your daily dose of news with legit football and PFF analytics and Ari breaking down the news, you'll have everything you need. All right, halftime speeches have been given. We have been rehydrated. Ari, you ready to get the second half started?
Yep, I'm excited for this. I have a couple more intriguing questions here left on my end.
Awesome. Same here. I have a list of questions, and I added the Dolphins one on, so I've got plenty to go. This one's going to be a little bit more straightforward. So the Tennessee Titans finished as the number 1 seed in the AFC last year. They went on an incredible run. Some might say it's the schedule makers broke right, and it just kind of worked out that way. Obviously, they did not make it as far as they liked. And then what did they do? They lost talent. Derrick Henry coming back from an injury. You now have A.J. Brown with the Eagles. You tried to replace him with Treylon Burks, but he's a rookie. Even if he's got that talent level, it could take years before he becomes the kind of caliber of receiver that Brown has shown to be. And Tannehill struggled a little bit. Julio Jones didn't work out, so Tannehill didn't have as good a season as he had previously. So my question is simple. Do the Titans make the playoffs in an absolutely gauntlet of an AFC where anywhere between 12 and 13 teams could be contending for those 7 spots? Do the Titans even make it in?
The reason why I would be optimistic that they do is simply because of the division that they're in. which, as you know, to make the playoffs in the NFL, if you win the division, you're in regardless of your record. So, because there's the Jaguars there, who should obviously, I think they made a lot of improvements this offseason, but still a team that's work in progress. Houston, another team that isn't work in progress. The Colts, who have, for the most part, they made some changes, have a new quarterback. We'll see how that goes. Titans did lose A.J. Brown, but I think one of the most underrated moves made this offseason was actually them also acquiring Robert Woods from the Rams, who is recovering from a torn ACL, but he has really been just awesome for the Rams really throughout his career since he got there. And the underrated aspect about him is not just that he's a really good receiver, he is arguably the best blocking wide receiver in the NFL as well. He's graded over 80 on PFF at run blocking, 3 times over 70, I believe, every single year of his career. I think it was 89 last year. He's a tremendous blocker as well. When you talk about a team that is run heavy with Derrick Henry, I think that would definitely help out for them when you have a receiver who is willing to do all the dirty work. On top of that, I would just add, yes, Ryan Tannehill's last playoff game against the Bengals was really bad. It's the last thing we all remember about him. I would add he had a pretty decent year in the regular season. And you have to remember that throughout that year last year, they lost Derrick Henry. They were missing A.J. Brown for a few games. Julio Jones basically never played. You look around that team, he was missing basically all his weapons at some points of the year. And you mentioned the stacked AFC. It was stacked last year, and guess who was the number 1 seed there? It was them. So do I think they'll be number 1 seed again this year? I think it's a bit of an uphill battle. But the fact that they're in the AFC South, in that division, where there are winnable games against those teams, which essentially are you never want to say anything are freebies in the NFL, but when you have divisions like the AFC West, where you have the Raiders, Chiefs, Broncos, and Chargers, and you have to face them twice a year, and then your division, you have the Jaguars and Texans who are still working their way up, it definitely benefits them.
Yeah, that's a great point. That just from a schedule standpoint, being able to play those guys, and this is a division matchup, anything can happen, but it's a little bit easier knowing you're going up against the Jaguars, even if they're better, than if you're going up against the Raiders, who have added Devontae Adams, or you go up with Russell Wilson and the Broncos. So absolutely great point. I personally have the Colts winning that division, and the Titans right on the edge, not making it in. And of course, a lot of this depends on injuries, and there's stuff that's going to happen that we haven't even predicted yet, but should be fun to watch. I think we're both in agreement that getting back to that number 1 seed, that's going to be a tall order, especially with the losses they've had. So
yeah, it's definitely going to be an uphill battle for them to win the number 1 seed, especially considering all the talent in the AFC. But hey, it's the NFL, and we've been surprised before. I would not be surprised again if something crazy happens. All right, for my next question here, I have one that's really been stretched out throughout this offseason, and that is what happened to Jimmy Garoppolo. And obviously now the team has officially moved on from him in terms of being in the building and everything.
Poor guy's like running off to the side at camp.
Yeah, like he's not even on the field. He's just coming in, does his throwing, and leaves.
Yep.
What happened? Like there aren't really that many logical landing spots except for a division rival in Seattle. So as we get closer to the season, do they eventually have to cut him? Will the team step up? His contract would have to be renegotiated if he is traded. So there's a lot of big questions there, and we're getting pretty close to the season already, and there's still no answers there.
So they just re-signed Debo. So I'm not sure that there is a huge incentive to cut him. And I've actually mentioned this. I had a guest who runs a 49ers podcast, and I'm a guest on his podcast every week, the 49ers Rush podcast. And he's pretty plugged into the Niners. And he doesn't think there's a scenario that benefits the Niners to cut him at this point, even with that bloated contract. Because what if Lance gets injured? What if Lance is struggling and you've got this Super Bowl caliber roster outside of quarterback? Having a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo on there could be a benefit, but have they kind of burned that bridge? Seattle makes sense, but I like they'd have to cut him for that to happen. I can't see the Niners making a trade to the Seahawks. But purely the quarterback landscape, with the Panthers having traded for Baker Mayfield, the Seahawks are really the only team that absolutely makes sense, because that's a team where he could come in and start. He's a clear upgrade over both Geno Smith and Drew Lock. But would they really, unless they view him so lowly, they're like, yeah, I don't care if you go play for Seattle. We know what we have here. But he did lead him to a Super Bowl. Would you really have that guy? What if he does find success with the Seahawks and you've got to play them twice a year? The teams that intrigue me, although I don't know that there's a benefit there either, but Houston with Nick Caserio, with that connection, but why bring him in? Davis Mills is apparently They're all in on him, and
they really like him.
Yeah,
they really like him.
and he seems to be doing. The reports I'm seeing coming out of camp is that Davis Mills is actually playing really well. He's getting rave reviews from his teammates, so I don't see that. Miami, the Mike McDaniels connection from San Francisco. They already have Teddy Bridgewater, though. They kind of have that backup quarterback. So to me, it comes down to two things. Either they keep him at this point and just say, hey, you're our backup, or holy crap, could he end up as the Seahawks starting quarterback at some point this year?
I don't think they keep him. First of all, $25 million for a backup is just not worth it. That's number one. Number two, there's the element, and they've already basically done this. There's the element of what if he's on the roster and Trey Lance struggles, and that locker room loves Jimmy Garoppolo. So if Trey Lance comes out week 1 and week 2 and it just lays an egg, you can imagine the locker room be like, oh, we got to go back to Jimmy. And it just creates a really difficult situation there. So they're ready to move on. It really does an injury happen. It's very rare. It's happened before. It was Teddy Bridgewater years ago. Does that happen and the team is forced to get him? Or I can't see Houston. I mentioned Davis Mills is the guy there. You mentioned the situation in Miami. I don't think that makes sense. Seattle makes the most sense if they're even interested. If he's cut, I think they might look into it. Trade, I don't think both sides would even want to do it. And again, as we get closer to the season, his agent would be like, there's no reason for us to do a trade and try to work a deal with a different team if we could just go out there and be free and pick our own destination. So the closer we get to the season, the more pressure is on the 49ers that they'll eventually have to cut it. So it's a tough situation. I can't see him being on the roster, though, come week 1.
Yeah, you bring a good point with as far as the locker room dynamics and what that could do for the team, which could jeopardize their entire season. So something I personally hadn't considered. I like that, and I think you might be right. So my question, you're an NFL insider. You may be privy to stuff that has not come out yet. I'm just going to ask you, do you see another big trade coming anytime soon? We can say Deontay Johnson in Pittsburgh. There's still, that's a contract issue. It doesn't have to be him. Do you think there could be one more big deal in his offseason that's been flooded with big deals?
There's 3 notable hold-ins right now. There's Derwin James in LA, and I think that deal gets done by the end of the week. If not, then they're very close. They're at like the half-yard inch line. So no, he's staying there. Roquan Smith in Chicago. New regime, they're interesting because the inside linebacker market has exploded over the last year with Darius Leonard and Fred Warner. He, too, by the way, does not have an agent, which makes things very interesting. Could that happen? I still doubt it, but they're nowhere near it right now in contract talks. And then Deontay Johnson, I just don't know if the Steelers would be willing to give him top-end money, even though they love him. I also just don't think it gets to a point where he gets traded, especially when you have those 2 quarterbacks right now and need to have as much talent as possible around them. So listen, as we get closer to cutdown day, there are 3 different cutdown days this year, just like last year. There will be trades. There will be a lot of minor trades. Usually by that final week of cutdown day, there's players who really performed well in training camp or in the preseason where you might think, all right, we might be okay moving on from this veteran and letting this young guy start. So as preseason gets started here and as training camps continue, I would just keep an eye to see, are there any veterans who might have a high salary and someone else is doing really well on that team, which as a result could force a trade for this player to move somewhere else where he could be used. I think we have to wait a little bit, but that would be the way. That's the way I always keep an eye on it every year. And I think that's the way it's probably going to happen this year because all the big deals for the most part are mostly done, right? Debo's done, DK is done, McLaurin is done. All those guys put some pressure on the team. The team never caved and they got an extension done. Who is that next guy? I don't think it'll be Roquan. I'll definitely just keep an eye on it. But I think let the preseason go by and we'll see as cut down day approaches.
Great. All right. Next question on you.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I don't know when this podcast is being released, but it's really Deshaun Watson and how the NFL just approaches everything. We're recording this on August 2nd. The NFL has until August 4th to figure out if they're going to appeal this thing. And I think the way the NFL is looking at this, really on Sunday night when we found out that the suspension news is coming the next morning, my sense and the way people thought about all this was that if it's 1-4, the NFL will 100% appeal it. If it's 8 or more, the NFL could find a way to wiggle out of it and say, you know what,
So I think we lost Ari there. I will keep mentioning that until we get him back. There you are.
I thought you got a call right there.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
yeah. As I was saying, yeah, if it was 1-4, they would appeal. If it was 8 or more, I think they'll be fine with keeping it. If it was 5, 6, or 7, I think they're stuck. And I think based off the reaction so far, they would want to appeal. This is the problem with appealing, though. And I think you might know the process already, but if they appeal, and let's just say Roger Goodell makes it 12 games, let's just say, the NFLPA could strike back and take this to sue them and take it to court. If that happens, there's a real scenario where Deshaun Watson is playing come week 1, week 2, week 3. And this thing is going to be essentially shadowing over the kickoff week and the early portion of the season, which I don't think the NFL wants. The NFL really cares about their image. Will the NFL go out right now and say, you know what, we'll take the 6 games, we'll move on, we'll take the PR hit now, but come the season, everyone's going to move on from it and we'll be fine? Or do we appeal it? There's potential where Deshaun Watson is playing come week 1, week 2, while this gets figured out in court, where the NFL usually prevails. But the problem is that we'll eventually have a scenario where he's playing to start the year, and this becomes a big topic around the NFL, around all news networks, not just the ESPN and NFL networks, but the CNNs and the TMZs and the Fox News and all those different people talking about the NFL in a really bad way, in a topic which they really don't want the average fans and below average fans to really see. So I think what the NFL does in these coming next couple of days, will they appeal, will they not? The fact that it fell at 6, I think was a worst case scenario for them. And they're having those meetings right now at Park Avenue and trying to figure out, is it worth it to appeal it and stretch this out? Or should we just move on, take the PR hit now, let's just have a season that starts the way we always do with the excitement and positivity. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on.
I know that public sentiment is weighing a lot into what the NFL decides to do here with regards to the appeal. Not that this is scientific, but Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk put out a poll and asked with all the different options, how much do you think? This was after the ruling. This was either today or yesterday. How much long do you think he should be suspended? Something like 70% of people who answered the poll, and it was in the thousands, said 12 a whole season. So, like, public sentiment, I think, is pretty clear that 6 games isn't enough. Is that pressure enough to actually get them to do something and make an appeal? Like you said, it draws out the process so much more. It changes the dynamics of whether he's playing. We'll find out soon. We're recording this live, and this podcast goes out shortly later today. So, we're timely. Next time we record will be Friday. We'll have to see. We'll have more on that there. So we got just over a minute left. This one is a very straightforward one. Texans over under 4.5 wins. No other context. I'll throw it. The Vegas has got them at 4.5 wins. Over under.
I'll take the over. I think, first of all, Davis Mills, we talked about it a little bit earlier. You can make a serious argument he was the second best rookie quarterback last year behind Mac Jones. Mm-hmm. Nobody really watched the Texans because they were just a disaster. But how many wins did they have last year? They had at least 3, 4, if I recall.
I think they finished with 4. It might have been 3.
Let me quickly check. They were 4-13 last year. So 4-13 last year. Year number 2 of Davis Mills. Brandon Cooks is back. They're really high on Nico Collins. They are getting Laramie Tunsil back. They had a really strong draft, in my opinion. Derek Stingley, if he actually plays like the Stingley we all thought. This is a team, again, they're in the AFC South. You have those games with the Jaguars, which could be toss-up games. I don't have my schedule in front of me, but I truly believe, at least for the future, Nick Caserio is finally brought some normalcy back to this building. And eventually we'll be talking about the Texans as a team that's up and coming. So I'll take the over right now, but I will just keep an eye on the future of the Texans. The next 2 or 3 years, it's going to take time because he entered a really rough situation. But they're in a good spot with him, and they have 2 first-round picks the next couple of years thanks to the Watson trade. So they have a lot of ammunition as well.
I am going to agree with you just quickly, even though the game has ended. We are now after the
Overtime.
fourth quarter. But I'm going to agree with you that I'm starting to believe in the over as well. I could see them at least winning 5 to 6 games. That's it. Post-game press conference, Ari Meirov, PFF. How did your team perform today?
I thought we both gave some great answers here.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I got to say, I love this whole element of how you set this all up. This is really entertaining, really fun.
Yeah.
Halftime, post-game, questions, answers. The whole thing is really well done. Overall, yeah, I thought we had some really great questions. A lot of big topics surrounding the NFL right now. We'll eventually have the real answers to all of these very soon, or I think we'll have it very soon. And it's going to be a crazy season, I'll tell you that much.
Completely agree. As usual, the 30 minutes goes by so fast, but especially when we have you on, Ari. We are going to be doing this 5 days a week during the NFL season.
Wow.
So I'd love to bring you back on. As you mentioned, you've been on some of my previous podcasts, so we'll be in touch. Ari, as always, thanks for coming on. Always nice to catch up. And thank you all for listening and watching. This has been 30 Minutes of Football with Legit Football. See you Friday.